We are live. Hi, I am Brooke McFadden, and I'm going to be sharing with you today my Family Proclamation project with Brigham Young University and my Family 100 class. We have been studying in that course a couple of wonderful things, several actually. But the book that we've been studying out of is called Proclamation, Principles, and Research Perspectives for Marriage and Family. And that's by Alan J. Hawkins, David C. Dollahite, and Thomas W. Draper. I've really appreciated the literature that I've read and the things that I've gained. I, for this project, reached out for social media and tried to get some input from some dear friends, some members of the church, some not, some Christians, some not. Um, had some wonderful feedback, but we're going to discuss family. We're also going to be pulling off of the Family Proclamation to the World from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And a quote that I wanted to start with says, "Happiness in the family is most likely to be achieved when founded upon the teachings of the Lord Jesus Christ. Successful marriages and families are established and maintained on principles of faith, prayer, repentance, forgiveness, respect, love, compassion, work, and wholesome recreational activities." So, as I have selected various chapters that I'll be covering right now, I've reached out to these friends and asked some kind of awkward and tight questions, some really personal things, and tried to pull out from each one of these to just debunk some myths about marriage and to really get a look through the lens of how it's actually affecting people in communities and in our society. And I figure no better way than to just reach out and get input. So here we go. The first chapter I chose in chapter 4 was talking about equal partnership. What I loved, actually, I delved into a quote that was shared here by Bruce E. Hayfin, and I love language. It's one thing that I'm also studying in school is linguistics. And he talks about the Hebrew translation of the word to rule. And we know that Adam and Eve, it says that Adam had rule over Eve. And when you look at the Hebrew definition of that, the word is bet, B-E-T. And what that translates to is it means ruling with, not ruling over. So the concept of that interdependent equal partnership is then grounded within this doctrine, right? Eve would Eve was Adam's helpmeet. And that Hebrew term for meet, meaning help meet, is that Eve was adequate for and equal to Adam. She wasn't his servant or his subordinate. We also had the discussion that equality is way too often meant to mean identical, right, or identity, and that two things that are equal do not have to be identical, and that spouses can be together and they can feel equal without being identical. And I really love that, and especially as a preface to this equal partnership. So some dear girlfriends and even some guy friends had reached out and talked about how they find some equality in their relationship. So they were talking about the give and take exchange there, that, one wife was like, not everybody likes to do dishes or laundry. And so she's like, I'll do dishes all day, but my husband hates it. But her husband loves to do laundry. And she's like, nope. And for me personally, I will not fold socks. It's just the rule. And my family knows it. Um, Cooking, not every wife loves to cook, and not every husband loves to eat. That's just like, oh, here's burnt food or whatever, and the husband's like, I'd rather eat out, right? So then you have offended feelings. You just go through all of it. So communication is key, and find out what is your give and take. My husband, sometimes we take turns who does grocery shopping. I'm not always a huge fan. And sometimes he loves the break and he goes and enjoys walking around and he'll shop and get everything that we have on our list and it works. So there's equality in that. Finances, right? Somebody is the bookkeeper in the house, somebody isn't. There has to be a shared opportunity in these things, right? We need to learn from each other and with each other. Um, so I really appreciated the discussion there about talking about that equal partnership. Some other things that were talked about is that they clean together. Now, it wasn't just one person who did all the cleaning. A mom was talking about how she is given the opportunity for her older kids to pick a night that they make dinner. They're out getting all of the ingredients. They're out figuring out what they want to make. They're out looking at the recipes, um, folding, putting away clothes, right? All of these various different things and how we can share in the household. Who's driving who to school? Who's taking who to that appointment? It all has to get divvied and communicated with one another. The next chapter is chapter 5, marriage, sexuality, and fertility. This was a sensitive subject. You're talking about one, sex in a marriage, but two, then you're putting fertility on top of that, either infertility or maybe one wife wants more children than the spouse does, or the opposite. The spouse is like, I want more kids, and the wife's like, I'm done. There's a lot of tension that can build in that. Um, we have a list of 5 things that I was just really impressed with from my literature from the successful marriages and families. And listen to these 5. Talks about one, that sexual interaction is a healthy component of marriage, and it actually needs to be a source where there's no negative feelings or guilt. Number 2, married persons deserve to feel good about their bodies and to view sexual expression as normal and a healthy part of marriage. This is so important. Number 3, a primary component of marital sexuality is giving and receiving pleasure. The touching content of intimate touch and that commitment to one another. It requires the relaxation and focus on the other person as well as yourself, right? Number 4, sexuality should be expressed in a way that enhances that intimate relationship and those bonds together. And number 5, couples should strive for a we relationship where both partners are sharing in pleasure, right? And it's not just hyper focused on one person all the time or vice versa. That this can be a group experience, right? The two of you, you're in it together. And so I just loved that. Sometimes it's that like, oh, she said the word sex. And it's like, of course I said the word sex. This is marriage. This is more than just intercourse. I'm talking about sexual communication, sexual response and language and expression. I'm talking about that there's intimate touch, massage, and just greeting each other, and kisses and hugs and loves and just snuggles and safety and protection and communication. Women need to be able to feel like somebody is talking to them, right? Not with the agenda to gain. And men also need to feel that there's just that commitment, that raw connection, that vulnerability from their wife where they can gain that bond, right? For that sexual bond. It's so important for them to feel empowered, for them to feel safe. Men also, right? They need to feel that too. I reached out to a couple of girlfriends and guy friends again on social media. I just made this a public post, just anyone who wanted to kind of share. And it was like, how do you view this? What do you think? This is true stories from real couples. So this is a couple that's been married for over 20 years, and her thing is carpe diem, right? Which means seize the day. Seize that moment, right? You need to look for weekends and opportunities and put locks on the door. Make sure that this isn't interrupted, that there is a minute, but to also not make it clockwork. Hey, 9 o'clock every night, that there needs to be some spontaneity that's left in that. We have another motto, just do it, right? This is a mom married 15 years, couple little kids. She's like, we have sex. It's just not complicated, right? That we keep that openness and that honesty. Date nights, they get their boys taken care of, they get out, they spend time together, because again, part of that is you need to feel connected with each other in order to feel like you want to have right intercourse with one another. It's so key and crucial. This is also a family that has dealt with fertility. And she's like, we went through that window where it started to feel like Mr. Roboto, where, they're taking the temperature and they're measuring things and, where are my fluids and blah, 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 and all this stuff where it was like, now we got to go now. And it just removed that spontaneity, that bond, that beautiful, natural, right, organicness of sexual connection. And so they really tried to kind of crumple that up and throw it out the window for a while because of the tension it was building. And, it was about 4 years later in that just total organicness of their, sexual connections and their intercourse. And they were able to conceive naturally. And it was powerful and really special for them. People were just discussing how important a committed time is, and how, you know, I remember in my pregnancy, I didn't feel good. I just didn't feel good. I was sick. I was nauseous. Oh my gosh. And so the idea of intercourse literally made me feel more sick. That was at least for the first like 4 months of being pregnant. And I remember that I was just like, the reality is that my husband wasn't going through any of those feelings that I was going through. And so I did my best to find ways that I was able to pleasure him and to be with him, to show that connection and to understand he is not going through this, right? And to find ways where we could work together and work with one another. And it wasn't like he was demanding, I need this now, right? It was about talking with each other. It was about finding ways where it was like, is this enough? Is this a give and take? Is this feeling good enough? What else do you feel like you need? What do I need? Right? And I'm like, just hold me. That was enough for me to feel like I was feeling sexually connected to. So important to just be able to talk to one another. And fertility is such a sensitive thing, and to realize that it also is affecting that man. Imagine if the female and her eggs and ovums are strong and healthy, but his sperm isn't. This not just that the woman can't conceive in her womb, this can also be very affecting to men to think, why am I not producing life? Right? I'm broken too. And so don't just always think that it's only females that are experiencing this. There is loss on both parties, and they need to be there with each other. Should I keep trying to work it out? I remember getting married and thinking, so when the other shoe drops, like, how do we not just like bail? How do we not just like, okay, all done, you know? And I'm reading about rates of divorce and all this stuff. And a couple of powerful quotes again in my reading. It was talking, Bruce C. Hafen was discussing the shepherd, the sheep, and the wolves in the parable. And life is hard, he says. It's full of problems or wolves, right? And dealing with those wolves is central to life's purpose. But for a husband and wife to deal with those wolves together, that's what's central in marriage. The wolves are going to come, the problems are going to show up. And, today's discussion is not when is it safe to bail, right? That's not the dialogue that I'm having. The conversation I'm asking is and presenting is how do I write it out? How do I stay committed? How can we stay in our marriage? So while marriage is difficult and frustrating, right? Lasting happiness is possible. This is a testimony from President Spencer W. Kimball. He says that there is just ecstasy, this excellent ecstasy that the human mind can't conceive on its own, but that it's within reach in each marriage, and to every person. So, um, a couple of people had said some really powerful things. They talked about loving God first. They talked about loving your spouse more than loving the need to win an argument. That is interesting, right? Pulling the ego out of it, pulling the I need to be right out of the dialogue, and making sure that you're making it about like we need to stay connected. That doesn't mean surrendering all the time and not ever having opinion. I'm not talking about being a carpet. I'm talking about finding middle ground and loving the person instead of your argument, right? Pray together, read scriptures together, communicate. Nothing is his, nothing is hers. This is ours, right? Um, she addressed three things that really affect marriage, and they just jumped right in. They aggressively looked at that and said, what are those three things? And what they found and discussed is they were talking about finances, infidelity, and raising children. And so they, in the beginning of their marriage, talked about these in depth and found ways to step ahead of it and to want to say, if this shows up in our marriage, what are we doing, right? Let's get out of debt. If debt is a challenge, let's stay out of it, right? If raising kids is an issue and, you know, working on disciplining our children is an issue, let's find common ground here as soon as possible. Really, really awesome. In chapter 9, I was talking about marriage in those later years. And so you have these older couples, the recently launched kids, these newly empty nesters. And it was like, oh, what's that like? Right? Someday, I'm far, far away from that. My eldest is 12 and my baby is 3. Um, there's just a lot here that was said. Uh, she was talking about her husband and her were uh, a friend of hers. Her and her husband were just completely intermeshed into their children's lives and kind of lost each other in the middle of that. And when those children left to go to school, all of a sudden they're looking each other in